The surgical lights had barely dimmed when my phone lit up with the notification. Painkillers clouded my thoughts, but I could still read the email subject line clearly. Dissolution of marriage, urgent. I remember laughing, thinking it must be spam. Who serves divorce papers to their wife of 12 years while she's recovering from emergency surgery? Dan Mitchell does, apparently. My husband hadn't even waited until I was conscious to send his lawyers neatly drafted documents. As I scrolled through the sterile language outlining our irreconcilable differences and his equitable division of assets, one thing became abundantly clear. Dan had no idea who he had just declared war against. He thought he was being clever, striking while I was at my weakest. But some family secrets are worth keeping until precisely the right moment. And that moment had just arrived. I pressed the nurse call button, asked for my personal items, and made a single phone call. "Dad," I whispered, my voice still hoarse from intubation. "It's time to tell Dan about the family business." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the notification on my phone. Just 3 days earlier, Dan had kissed me goodbye at our front door, told me to be brave for my surgery, and promised he'd be waiting when I woke up. He wasn't. Instead, a sterile email from his lawyer waited for me, detailing how my husband wanted to divide our life together while I was still attached to IV drips and monitoring machines. To understand why Dan thought this was his moment of triumph, you need to know a bit about our marriage. We met at a regional business conference in Portland 12 years ago. I was there representing my family's interests, though I never specified exactly what those were. Dan was an ambitious business consultant with a charming smile and big dreams of having his own custom furniture manufacturing business someday. He spoke passionately about sustainable wood sourcing and artisan craftsmanship, subjects that made me smile for reasons he couldn't have understood at the time. 6 months after we married, my father made Dan an unexpected offer, financing to start his dream business. Gallagher Money purchased the workshop space in Southeast Portland, bought the equipment, and funded the initial inventory. To Dan, it seemed like an extraordinarily generous gift from his new father-in-law. What my husband never questioned was why a retired banker would invest so heavily in a furniture business, or why I never seemed concerned about the risk. "You're a lucky man," James Gallagher told him as they toasted the opening of Mitchell Fine Furniture. "Elena believes in you, and that's good enough for me." For 8 years, Dan built the business into what he believed was his own success story. The company expanded from custom dining tables to full residential and commercial furnishing. The workshop grew into a showroom, which grew into 3 showrooms across Oregon. Dan became known for his exquisite craftsmanship and business acumen, neither of which were actually his. From day one, master craftsmen from Gallagher Enterprises, my family's 3-generation furniture manufacturing business, had been quietly employed as consultants. Our family's industry connections provided the sustainable wood sourcing Dan bragged about. Our established distribution networks explained his lucky breaks with major commercial clients. Dan thought he was the business genius. In reality, he was the charming frontman for a small branch of the Gallagher empire, a branch we allowed him to believe he created and controlled. I never intended to maintain the illusion forever. In the early years of our marriage, I genuinely loved Dan. I planned to introduce him to the full scope of the family business when the time was right. But as success inflated his ego, our relationship changed. The man who once looked at me with adoration began to see me as an accessory to his success. The dynamic of our partnership shifted, with Dan increasingly dismissive of my input both at home and when I occasionally visited his workshop. "Honey, leave the business decisions to me," became his standard response whenever I offered suggestions. "You wouldn't understand the complexities." I did understand, of course. I had grown up in the business, learning woodworking alongside my brother Thomas since we were tall enough to see over the workbench. I held a master's degree in business that Dan didn't know about, from courses I'd claimed were community college art classes. For years, I'd been analyzing his company's financial reports before he even saw them, making corrections through our family's financial manager, who Dan believed was just an exceptionally qualified accountant he'd been lucky to hire. The final fracture in our marriage came 6 months before my surgery. Dan hired Victor Reynolds as his business partner without consulting me. Victor, with his slick presentations and Harvard MBA, convinced Dan that they could expand the business nationwide with the right restructuring. What Dan didn't know was that Victor had a history of hollowing out small, successful companies and selling off their assets, information that would have been discovered with even a basic background check, which Dan never performed. I tried to warn him. "Something doesn't feel right about Victor's proposal," I said over dinner the night after they signed the partnership agreement. "That's why I handle the business and you handle the house, Elena," Dan replied, not even looking up from his phone. "Leave the complicated decisions to those of us who understand them." That night, I called my father. "I think it's time to start protecting our interests," I told him. The next day, paperwork began moving through channels Dan didn't know existed. We didn't withdraw support. That would have been too obvious. Instead, we simply secured what was ours while letting Dan believe everything was proceeding according to his grand vision. The surgery that put me in Cedar Ridge Medical Center wasn't planned. A ruptured appendix sent me to the emergency room in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Dan was in Seattle with Victor, supposedly meeting potential investors. He hadn't bothered to tell me he was leaving town. My mother found me collapsed on our kitchen floor when she stopped by unexpectedly with soup from my favorite deli. Catherine Gallagher, despite being in her 60s, had me in her car and at the hospital in record time. She called Dan repeatedly, while doctors prepped me for surgery, but he never answered. "Don't worry about him now," she told me, squeezing my hand as they administered anesthesia. "Your father is handling it." I woke up 17 hours later to discover that while I had been fighting a severe infection, my husband had been finalizing his exit strategy, not just from our marriage, but from the oversight of the Gallagher family. The divorce papers cited financial independence as a factor, with Dan claiming the business as his separate property since it was created and developed solely through his expertise and effort. The documents outlined his generosity in letting me keep our house, which was actually owned by a Gallagher family trust, and a fair stipend from the business profits for 2 years, access to money that was already mine. In exchange, he wanted me to relinquish any claim to Mitchell Fine Furniture and its assets. Dr. Williams was concerned about my rising heart rate as I read through the documents. "Ms. Mitchell, you need to rest," she insisted, reaching for my phone. "It's Ms. Gallagher, actually," I corrected her, suddenly finding the strength to sit up. "And what I need is my laptop, and for you to please ask my parents to come back immediately." The doctor hesitated. "You just had major surgery with complications. Your body needs time to recover." "Trust me, doctor," I said, feeling more clarity than I had in years. "What I'm about to do will be far more therapeutic than rest." Olivia Martinez, our family's lawyer, arrived within the hour, carrying a slim leather portfolio and looking every bit as formidable as her reputation suggested. My parents followed shortly after, my father's face a mask of controlled anger, my mother bearing fresh clothes and my favorite tea in a thermos. "He's emptied your joint accounts," my father said without preamble, pulling a chair up to my bedside. "And he's trying to redirect the business payments to new accounts only in his name." I nodded, unsurprised. "And Victor?" "Already approached 3 of our major commercial clients, telling them the company is restructuring and contracts need to be updated with new payment information." My father's expression would have been frightening to anyone who didn't know the depth of his love for his family. "They called me, of course. Nobody touches Gallagher accounts without talking to me first." Olivia spread several documents on the adjustable table across my hospital bed. We've been preparing for something like this since you called 6 months ago, though I must say, his timing shows remarkably poor character. That's putting it mildly, my mother muttered, arranging pillows behind my back with the fierce efficiency that had helped her run the administrative side of Gallagher Enterprises for decades. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What matters now, Olivia continued, is how you want to proceed. We can handle this quietly, or... She paused, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. We can ensure Mr. Mitchell understands exactly who he's attempted to deceive. I looked at the documents before me. Legal proof of the Gallagher family's ownership of everything Dan thought was his, from the building he worked in to the tools he used daily. Even the trademark for the Mitchell Fine Furniture name was ultimately controlled by a Gallagher holding company. For years, I had protected Dan's pride, allowed him his illusion of independent success, hoped that our marriage was more important to him than his ego. That illusion had just been shattered by the coldest betrayal imaginable. I want him to understand, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Every last detail. My father nodded in approval. Marcus Chen is waiting for your call. As CFO, he needs your authorization to lock down the accounts. I reached for my phone, wincing slightly at the pull on my stitches. The familiar voice of our company's chief financial officer answered on the first ring. Elena, how are you feeling? Your father told me about the surgery. I've been better, Marcus. I believe you've been briefed about Dan's recent activities? Yes, he replied, his tone shifting to the precise professional cadence I'd come to rely on over the years. He's attempting to redirect company funds and has submitted paperwork to remove your family's financial manager. Victor Reynolds has also been making concerning moves with client relationships. Implement Protocol Timber, I said, using the code word we'd established months ago. Full documentation lockdown, account freeze, and security protocol changes at all facilities. Immediately, Marcus confirmed. And Elena, I'm sorry about Dan. We all thought he was different. So did I, Marcus. But as my grandmother used to say, better to know the truth than live with a comfortable lie. After ending the call, I looked up to find my mother watching me with a mixture of concern and pride. You should rest now, she said gently. The company will be secure, and everything else can wait until you're stronger. I shook my head. No, there's one more thing that can't wait. Dad, can you ask Thomas to bring the Mitchell portfolio? And I need someone to record Dan's reaction when he realizes what's happening. My father's eyebrows raised slightly. You want to be there when he finds out? Not in person, I clarified. I'm not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me in a hospital bed, but I want to watch it happen. I've earned that much. As my parents and Olivia made their preparations to leave, Dr. Williams returned to check my vitals. Your blood pressure is elevated, she noted with concern. Whatever business you're handling needs to wait. Just 1 more hour, doctor, I promised. What I'm doing right now is better than any medicine for what ails me. She didn't look convinced, but nodded reluctantly. 1 hour, then you rest? Or I'll have security remove all visitors and confiscate your phone. After she left, my father squeezed my hand. We'll handle this, Elena. You focus on getting better. I already am, Dad, I replied, feeling a new sense of resolution washing over me. Every minute since I read those divorce papers, I've been getting better. 3 hours later, Thomas arrived with the Mitchell portfolio and a tablet. My brother, always the most tech-savvy of the Gallaghers, had set up discreet cameras in the main office the previous month, just as a security precaution. Now they would serve a different purpose. Dan and Victor just arrived at the office, Thomas reported, setting up the tablet so I could see the feed. They look pretty pleased with themselves. Marcus is already there with security and the documentation team. I adjusted my position, ignoring the pain that flared across my abdomen. Some things were worth a little discomfort. On screen, I watched as Dan strode confidently through the workshop he believed was the physical manifestation of his success. Victor walked beside him, both men in expensive suits that looked out of place among the sawdust and wood shavings. They nodded dismissively to the craftsmen, Gallagher master woodworkers who had been with our company for decades, and headed toward the administrative offices. Dan's stride faltered as he noticed Marcus Chen standing outside his office door, accompanied by 2 men in suits and a woman with a legal portfolio. "What's going on, Marcus?" Dan's voice came clearly through the tablet speakers. "Who are these people?" "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus replied formally. "These are representatives from Gallagher Enterprises' legal department and security team. They need to speak with you immediately regarding some concerning transactions you've initiated." Dan laughed, though I could hear the nervousness beneath it. "There must be some mistake. I don't answer to Gallagher Enterprises. My father-in-law helped me start this business, but it's mine. If James has concerns, he can call me directly." "Actually, Mr. Mitchell," the woman with the portfolio stepped forward. "Gallagher Enterprises doesn't just help run this company, it owns it, completely, including the name, the property, the equipment, and the client contracts. I have the documentation here." Victor looked sharply at Dan. "What is she talking about? You said this was your company." "It is my company." Dan's voice rose. "This is ridiculous. Some kind of misunderstanding." The woman opened her portfolio and began laying documents on the desk visible in the camera frame. "These are the original incorporation papers for Mitchell Fine Furniture, showing it as a wholly owned subsidiary of Gallagher Holdings. This is the property deed for this building, owned by Gallagher Real Estate Development. These are the equipment purchase and lease agreements, all under Gallagher Manufacturing Assets." With each document, Dan's face grew paler. Victor took a step back, his expression shifting from confusion to calculation. "This is Elena's doing, isn't it?" Dan suddenly snarled. "She's trying to scare me because of the divorce. Well, it won't work. I've built this business over 8 years. No judge will ignore that." Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell, you should know that all company accounts have been secured. Your attempt to redirect funds has been documented and could be considered attempted misappropriation of company assets. Furthermore, your recent communications with clients, misrepresenting ownership of contracts, have been preserved as evidence." Victor was already edging toward the door. "Dan, you told me this was your company, that there were no complications." "It is my company," Dan insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "James Gallagher gave it to me when Elena and I married. Mr. Gallagher allowed you to operate as the public face of a small branch of the family business," Marcus corrected calmly. "Ms. Gallagher permitted you to believe it was yours out of respect for your marriage. That arrangement has clearly ended with your divorce filing, while she was in emergency surgery, I might add." The security personnel moved subtly to block the exits as Dan began frantically searching through the documents. "There must be something. Some paperwork I signed," he muttered. "Everything is in order, Mr. Mitchell," the legal representative said. "You've never owned this company. You've been an employee of Gallagher Enterprises, albeit one with unusual latitude. Until now." The tablet screen split to show a second camera feed as the main entrance door opened, and my father walked in, accompanied by Olivia Martinez. Dan's expression shifted from desperate to pleading at the sight of his father-in-law. "James, thank God. Please explain to these people that this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them about our arrangement." My father regarded Dan with the same expression he used when examining substandard wood samples. "The only arrangement, Daniel, was that you would be good to my daughter and honest in your dealings. You failed at both." "This is about the divorce?" Dan's laugh was hollow. "People get divorced every day. It's not personal." Serving papers while she recovers from life-threatening surgery is the definition of personal, my father replied, his voice ice-cold. But that's between you and Elena. My concern is the business you've attempted to steal and the client relationships you've tried to damage. Victor had reached the door, but found his path blocked by one of the security team. I had no idea about any of this, he protested. I was brought in as a partner in good faith. Olivia Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, your history of stripping companies of assets before abandonment is well documented. We have copies of your communications with Mr. Mitchell discussing how to extract maximum value from what you both referred to as the old man's investment. Your partnership agreement was never valid, as Mr. Mitchell had no authority to enter into it. The blood drained from Dan's face as he looked between Victor and my father. James, please. We can work something out. I've built this business into what it is today. My expertise, my client relationships. Your expertise? My father raised an eyebrow. The master craftsman who actually built the furniture might disagree. As for client relationships, those have always been with Gallagher Enterprises, regardless of what name was on the business card you handed out. What do you want? Dan finally asked, slumping against the desk. Money? I can buy you out. My father looked genuinely amused for the first time. With what exactly? The funds you attempted to divert this morning have been returned to their proper accounts. Your personal accounts, as documented in your divorce filing, contain less than a year's operating expenses for this facility. Then what happens now? Dan's voice had lost all its bluster. Now, my father said, you and Mr. Reynolds will be escorted from the premises. Your personal belongings will be packed and delivered to wherever you specify. The divorce proceedings will continue, but with accurate financial disclosures, and Elena will decide what happens with this branch of our family business. Dan's face contorted with sudden rage. She planned this all along, letting me think this was mine, waiting to pull the rug out. No, Daniel, my father replied calmly. Elena believed in you. She kept your ego intact at considerable effort. She intended to bring you fully into the family business when you'd proven yourself worthy. Your actions proved the opposite. As security began to escort Dan and Victor toward the exit, Dan turned back. This isn't over, James. I have rights. Yes, you do, Olivia Martinez interjected. You have the right to an attorney. You might need one, given the questionable transactions we've documented. Good day, Mr. Mitchell. I watched as Dan was led out of the building that had never truly been his. Through the window visible on camera, I could see him standing in the parking lot, looking back at the Mitchell Fine Furniture sign with disbelief written across his face. Thomas turned to me as the feed ended. Are you okay? I was surprised to find I was smiling. I'm better than I've been in years. What will you do with the company? He asked. I considered the question. Rename it, for starters, then expand. The custom design department, like I've wanted to do for years. Dan always said it wasn't profitable enough, but he never understood the craft like we do. My brother nodded approvingly. Back to being a true Gallagher business. It always was, I said softly. Dan just couldn't see the forest for the trees. Ironic, for a man who claimed to know wood. Dr. Williams returned, frowning at the gathering in my room. This is exactly what I asked you not to do. I handed the tablet back to Thomas. We're finished now, doctor, and you'll be happy to know my blood pressure feels much better. She checked my vitals, looking surprised. Actually, it has improved. Whatever you just resolved must have been significant. Just removing some dead wood, I replied, catching my brother's eye as he suppressed a laugh. Sometimes that's necessary for healthy growth. As my family prepared to leave, allowing me the rest I now genuinely wanted, my mother lingered behind. You know, she said quietly, your grandmother faced something similar when she was young. Your grandfather tried to push her out of the family business, thinking the men should control it. I hadn't heard this story before. What happened? My mother smiled, the same smile I'd seen in photographs of her formidable mother-in-law. She let him think he'd won, right up until the board meeting when she presented documentation of her majority ownership. The Gallagher women have never been as publicly visible as the men, but we've always held the true power. She patted my hand. Rest now. The business will be there when you're ready, and it will be exactly what you want it to be. As the door closed behind her, I sank back against the pillows, feeling the weight of deceit and pretense finally lifting from my shoulders. The pain of Dan's betrayal was still there, but already fading beneath the anticipation of what would come next. Sometimes, I reflected, the most valuable family heirlooms aren't the things you can touch or see. They're the lessons passed down through generations: patience, preparation, and the wisdom to know exactly when to reveal your hand. I woke the following morning to sunlight streaming through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across my room. The events of yesterday felt almost dreamlike, but the quiet buzz of my phone with updates from Marcus confirmed it had all been very real. Dan had spent the night at the Red Lion Hotel downtown. Not our home, not the apartment he'd secretly leased 3 months ago. Yes, I knew about that too. But a generic hotel room paid for with his increasingly useless credit card. Despite the lingering pain from surgery, I felt lighter than I had in years. Dr. Williams noticed it immediately during her morning rounds. "Your recovery is progressing remarkably well," she observed, reviewing my chart. "Whatever stress was, holding you back seems to have resolved itself." I smiled. "You could say that." After she left, I carefully shifted to a sitting position and opened my laptop. There were decisions to be made, and despite my family's insistence that everything could wait until I was discharged, I had no intention of giving Dan even a day's head start on whatever desperate counter-move he might be planning. The first email was from Olivia, sent at 5:37 a.m. Our family lawyer apparently didn't sleep when there was legal maneuvering to be done. As expected, Mr. Mitchell's attorney Gregory Phillips contacted me last night, she wrote. "They're claiming, you've engaged in deliberate financial deception throughout the marriage and are demanding an emergency hearing. Judge Winters has denied the request, citing your medical condition and insufficient evidence of urgency. We have a standard hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. Rest and recover. This first attempt was merely posturing." I wasn't surprised. Dan had always believed in attacking first and thinking later, a strategy that had occasionally served him well in business negotiations, but would prove disastrous against the methodical, evidence-based approach of Gallagher legal teams. My phone rang. Thomas. "Morning, sis. How are you feeling?" "Like someone removed an organ and then I watched my marriage implode," I replied dryly. "So, better than expected." Thomas laughed. "Well, your sense of humor is intact. Listen, I'm at the workshop. The team is asking for direction since Operation Deadwood cleared out the management." Operation Deadwood? Really? Dad named it, not me. I could hear the smile in my brother's voice. It seemed fitting. I shifted the laptop to view the company organization chart I'd been revising through the early morning hours. "Marcus has temporary operational control, but I need you to meet with the senior craftsmen. Dale, Joseph, and Werner especially. They've been there since the beginning and endured Dan's leadership the longest." What should I tell them? The truth. That Mitchell Fine Furniture is being reabsorbed into the main Gallagher operation. That their jobs are secure. And that the custom design division will be expanded rather than phased out as Dan had planned. There was a pause on the line. He was going to cut the custom division. That's the heart of the operation. According to the business plan I found on his cloud drive 3 months ago, yes. Victor convinced him that mass production was more profitable. They were going to lay off the master craftsmen and convert to assembly line furniture making. Thomas swore under his breath. No wonder Dale's been looking so worried. He probably suspected something was coming. Tell them all that not only are their jobs secure, but I'll be reviewing the compensation structure as soon as I'm back. Dan's been underpaying them compared to our other facilities. Will do. Anything else? I glanced at another email that had just arrived. This one from Marcus with the subject line, Reynolds situation. Yes, actually. Can you ask Marcus to come by the hospital this afternoon? There's something happening with Victor that needs my direct attention. After ending the call, I opened Marcus's email and felt a cold anger spreading through my chest. According to our security team's overnight monitoring, Victor Reynolds had spent the evening contacting our major clients, telling them that Mitchell, Fine Furniture, was experiencing a hostile family takeover and might not be able to fulfill orders. He was offering to rescue their projects through a new venture he was establishing, using proprietary designs he claimed to have developed. The designs in question were, of course, Gallagher patterns that had been in our family's portfolio for decades, some dating back to my grandfather's original work. Dan had presented them as his own creations over the years, and Victor apparently believed they were original to the company. I typed a quick reply to Marcus. Implement intellectual property protection protocol. Contact all affected clients directly. I'll prepare a personal statement for each one by noon. A soft knock at the door interrupted my strategizing. My mother entered carrying a basket that filled the room with the aroma of fresh-baked goods. You're supposed to be resting, she chided gently, eyeing the laptop. I am resting, I protested. I'm in bed, aren't I? She set the basket down and pulled a chair close to my bedside. Elena Gallagher Mitchell, I've known you your entire life. Your version of resting involves 3 devices and a strategic plan. I couldn't help but smile. I learned from the best. Don't think I've forgotten about you reviewing quarterly projections from Dad's hospital room after your knee surgery. She reached into the basket and withdrew a still warm cinnamon roll, my childhood favorite and a Gallagher family recipe that had never made it into the company cookbook. Comfort food, she explained, placing it on a napkin. Some battles are better fought on a full stomach. As I savored the first bite, she pulled out her own tablet. Now, since I know you won't stop working, we might as well work together. I've drafted responses to the clients Victor contacted overnight. 5. So far, I raised an eyebrow. The security notifications go to you too? I added myself to the alert system after your father's blood pressure spiked during the last crisis. Someone in the family needed to sleep occasionally. She handed me the tablet. Review these while I go charm Dr. Williams into letting you have decent coffee. The client communications were perfect. Warm, personal, just concerned enough to acknowledge the unusual situation, but confident in the resolution. My mother had always had a gift for making people feel simultaneously reassured and special. By the time she returned with a contraband cappuccino from the cafe across the street, I had approved all 5 messages with only minor edits. Marcus is downstairs, she informed me. He says Victor made another move this morning. Send him up, I said, closing the laptop and straightening as much as my stitches would allow. If I was going to direct a corporate counteroffensive from a hospital bed, I could at least look somewhat commanding. Marcus Chen entered carrying a sleek portfolio and wearing an expression that mixed concern with barely concealed satisfaction. Our CFO had never liked Dan, though he'd hidden it well during the years of pretense. Elena, he greeted me with a nod. You're looking remarkably well for someone orchestrating a corporate takedown while recovering from surgery. Gallagher. Women are efficient multitaskers, my mother interjected with a smile. Marcus placed the portfolio on my adjustable table. Victor Reynolds made a critical error this morning. He attempted to access our design database using Dan's credentials. I leaned forward. Did he succeed? No. Your brother's security protocols worked perfectly. The system allowed him to believe he was downloading files while actually feeding him corrupted data and tracking his activities. Marcus couldn't hide his admiration for Thomas's technological trap. We now have documented evidence of attempted intellectual property theft. And the real database? Secure and removed from any server Dan or Victor ever accessed. Thomas migrated everything to our protected family archives last month. I nodded, pleased but not surprised by my brother's foresight. What's Victor doing now? Currently meeting with 3 potential investors at the Riverside Grill. Our source says he's promising them innovative designs and established client relationships for a new venture called Reynolds Artisan Furniture. My mother made a sound that somehow conveyed both amusement and disdain. Rather presumptuous of him. More than presumptuous, I replied, scanning the documents Marcus had brought. It's actionable. Have we heard from Dan this morning? Marcus and my mother exchanged a glance. Actually, Marcus said carefully, Dan called your father an hour ago. I looked up sharply. And? He wants to meet, says there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and that he can explain everything. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. I'm sure he can. Did Dad agree? He said he'd consult with you first, my mother answered. Your father was quite cold with him. I considered the situation carefully. Dan reaching out to my father rather than directly to me was telling. He still believed James Gallagher was the ultimate decision-maker, the patriarch whose approval could fix everything. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of our family dynamic that had persisted throughout our marriage, despite my attempts to explain that Gallagher Enterprises operated as a true partnership between my parents, with increasing input from Thomas and me as we grew into our roles. Tell Dad to meet him, I decided. But not alone. Thomas should go too. Not your father's lawyer? Marcus asked. I shook my head. This isn't primarily a legal meeting. It's Dan trying to salvage his pride and position. He'll respond better to family than to lawyers at this stage. Besides, I want to know what he says when he thinks I'm not listening. My mother nodded approvingly. I'll call your father now. As she stepped out to make the call, Marcus laid out the latest financial reports. Dan did more damage than we initially thought. He and Victor had been systematically overcharging certain clients and directing the excess into a separate account for the past 4 months. I frowned, scanning the highlighted transactions. Clever. Not the major clients who might have accounting departments to catch this, but the smaller ones who trusted Dan implicitly. Exactly. The total diverted so far is just under $217,000. I exhaled slowly, disappointment settling heavily alongside the pain in my abdomen. Even expecting betrayal, the evidence of Dan's deliberate deception hurt. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision, or a moment of weakness. This was calculated theft from people who had trusted him. Restore the proper pricing immediately, I instructed. Prepare refunds with a personal apology from the company. And Marcus, yes? Use the Gallagher letterhead, not Mitchell's. It's time these clients knew who they're really doing business with. He nodded, making notes. And the diverted funds? How much is left in that account? About $180,000. The rest appears to have financed Victor's research trips to potential manufacturing sites and Dan's apartment. I felt a surge of cold anger. The surgery that had nearly killed me had been delayed by 6 hours in the emergency room, while Dan had been furnishing a secret apartment with money stolen from our clients. Freeze the account, but don't recover the funds yet, I decided. Let's keep that as evidence for now. My mother returned as Marcus was gathering his papers. Your father and Thomas will meet Dan at the lodge at 2 p.m. They're setting up discreet recording as we discussed. The lodge was a private club in downtown Portland where my father occasionally conducted business meetings. Its wood-paneled rooms and strict privacy policies made it ideal for conversations that needed to remain confidential. Perfect, I said. Now, has anyone spoken to Olivia about the client overcharges? Already on it, Marcus assured me. She's preparing the appropriate documentation in case this becomes part of the legal proceedings. After Marcus left, I allowed myself a moment to close my eyes, suddenly aware of the physical toll the morning's activities had taken. My mother noticed immediately. "You've done enough for now," she said firmly. "Rest for a few hours. I'll wake you when your father calls after the meeting." For once, I didn't argue. The combination of surgical recovery and emotional strain was catching up to me, and I knew the coming days would require all my strength and clarity. I woke to the gentle pressure of my mother's hand on my shoulder and the afternoon sun casting different shadows across the hospital room. "Elena," she said softly, "your father's on his way up. The meeting with Dan just ended." I blinked away the fog of sleep, wincing as I adjusted my position. "What time is it?" "Almost 4. You needed the rest." She helped me raise the head of the bed and handed me a small mirror. "Do you want a moment to freshen up?" I glanced at my reflection, pale but composed, my dark hair pulled back in a simple braid she must have done while I slept. "I'm fine. Did Dad say how it went?" Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door, and my father entered with Thomas close behind. One look at their expressions told me the meeting had gone exactly as I'd expected. My father took the chair beside my bed while Thomas positioned himself at the foot, arms crossed in the protective stance he'd adopted since we were children. "How are you feeling?" my father asked, his lined face showing the concern he'd been careful to hide from Dan. "Better for having slept," I admitted. "Tell me about the meeting." My father exchanged a glance with Thomas before beginning. Dan arrived in the same suit as yesterday. Looked like he hadn't slept much. Started with apologies. To me, not to you. Said he'd made a terrible mistake, that Victor had manipulated him. Thomas made a disgusted sound. He tried the victim card first. When that didn't work, he switched to nostalgia, how much he'd contributed to the business, how he'd grown it beyond what you initially invested in. As if the Gallagher name and connections had nothing to do with that growth, my mother murmured. When he realized we weren't sympathetic, he changed tactics, my father continued. Offered to drop his claims to the business in exchange for a fair settlement and ongoing consulting role. I raised an eyebrow. "Consulting?" Thomas snorted. His exact words were, "The clients know me as the face of the company. You need me for the transition." As if we haven't been running furniture businesses for 3 generations without him. I wasn't surprised by Dan's overestimation of his importance, but I was curious about the settlement he envisioned. Did he specify what he considers fair? $2 million in ongoing royalties for what he called his designs, my father replied, his tone making clear what he thought of this proposal. Despite everything, I laughed, then regretted it as pain flared across my surgical site. So modest of him. "There's more," Thomas said, his expression darkening. When Dad rejected his offer, he threatened to go public with how the Gallagher family deceived him throughout the marriage. Said it would make for quite a story, the controlling family business that set him up to fail. My mother inhaled sharply. He wouldn't dare. "He would," I countered, surprisingly calm. "Dan has always believed appearances matter more than substance. He thinks the threat of public embarrassment will force us to concede." My father nodded slowly. "That's exactly what he's counting on." He mentioned specific reporters by name, said they'd be very interested in how a family like ours operates. I considered this new information carefully. Dan was desperate, backed into a corner of his own making, but his instinct to attack publicly presented both danger and opportunity. "Did you record the conversation as planned?" I asked Thomas. "Every word," he confirmed, including his admission about the client overcharging, which he tried to blame on Victor's aggressive growth strategies. "Send the recording to Olivia immediately," I instructed. "And then I need you to contact Melissa Rivera." Thomas looked surprised. "The business journalist? The one who did that feature on family businesses last year?" The same. She's been trying to get an interview about Gallagher Enterprises for years. Tell her I'm ready to talk about our company history, our management philosophy, and our commitment to ethical business practices in a challenging market. My father's eyes widened slightly as he grasped my strategy. You're going to get ahead of Dan's narrative. Exactly. Dan wants to paint us as manipulative and controlling. I'll present the truth. A family business that gave an opportunity to a talented but unproven outsider who unfortunately betrayed that trust. My mother smiled slowly. And with evidence of his client overcharging, his narrative falls apart before he can even begin. Precisely. I turned to Thomas. Set it up for tomorrow afternoon, here at the hospital. Are you sure you're up for it? He asked, concern evident in his voice. A hospital interview adds credibility to our side, I pointed out. The wife who was served divorce papers during emergency surgery, now revealing the financial misconduct her husband tried to hide. It writes itself. My father chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. You always did have a flair for the strategic narrative, and Melissa Rivera is respected, not a sensationalist. There's something else, I added, a new plan forming as I spoke. We need to contact the clients Dan and Victor overcharged directly before the story breaks. Personal calls, not just letters. I can handle that, my mother offered. Many of them know me from events over the years. Thank you. And Dad, I need you to meet with Dale and the other master craftsmen. They should hear what's happening directly from family leadership. As my family dispersed to implement the plans, each with clearly defined responsibilities, I felt a curious sense of liberation. For years, I had constrained my natural business instincts to protect Dan's ego, carefully packaging suggestions as questions, deferring publicly while influencing decisions behind the scenes. Now, operating openly as a Gallagher, the strategy flowed effortlessly. Dr. Williams arrived for her evening rounds as my family was leaving. She checked my vital signs with a slightly suspicious expression. Your recovery continues to be remarkable, she observed, though I notice a lot of business discussions happening for someone who's supposed to be resting. I find purpose therapeutic, I replied, and family support invaluable. She made a note in my chart. Well, whatever you're doing seems to be working. Your inflammation markers are down, and your incision is healing cleanly. If this continues, we might discharge you tomorrow afternoon instead of Saturday. After she left, I called Olivia for a legal update. Our attorney answered immediately, her crisp voice reassuring in its confidence. The recording Thomas just sent is extremely helpful, she informed me. Dan explicitly acknowledges that client funds were improperly handled. That changes our position significantly. How so? We can now file counterclaims in the divorce proceeding, citing financial impropriety and potential fraud. More importantly, if he attempts to go public with accusations against your family, we have concrete evidence of his misconduct. I considered our options carefully. I'm doing an interview with Melissa Rivera tomorrow. How much can I disclose about the client overcharges? You can reference that financial irregularities were discovered, which prompted closer examination of the business operations. I wouldn't specify amounts or name clients, but you can certainly confirm that refunds are being processed. And the ownership structure? Can I be explicit about Gallagher's role from the beginning? Absolutely. All of that is properly documented and filed with state business regulators. In fact, emphasizing the legitimate business structure helps establish that this isn't a vindictive action, but rather appropriate protection of long-established company interests. We discussed a few more legal details before ending the call. Alone in my hospital room as evening settled over Portland, I opened my laptop one more time to review the company financials. The Mitchell operation had always been profitable, But I could now see how much more successful it could become when fully integrated with our family's resources and freed from Dan's inefficient management. My phone chimed with a text from Marcus. Victor contacted 2 more clients today. Both called me immediately. V claims he's starting new company with Key Mitchell personnel. Dan appears to be keeping low profile. I wasn't surprised that Victor was continuing his desperate attempts to salvage something from the collapse of their plans. What interested me more was Dan's apparent retreat from the front lines. It wasn't like him to let someone else take the lead, especially in a crisis. I texted back, "Keep monitoring. Have security check Dan's recent movements." The response came quickly. "Already on it. We'll update by morning." Setting my phone aside, I allowed myself to imagine the future of the business post Dan. The Portland workshop would be rebranded, not with the Gallagher name directly, but perhaps as Legacy Artisan Furniture, honoring our family tradition while establishing a distinct identity. The master craftsmen would receive the recognition and compensation they deserved. The custom design division would expand, incorporating new talent and technologies while preserving traditional techniques. And my role would evolve too. After years of working in the shadows, I could step fully into my position as a Gallagher leader, bringing my own vision and expertise to the forefront. The thought filled me with energy despite my physical exhaustion. My contemplation was interrupted by another text message, this one from an unknown number. The content made my heart skip. "Elena, we need to talk. Not through lawyers, just us. What happened to us? Dan." I stared at the message for a long moment, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Anger at his audacity, sadness for what once was, curiosity about what he could possibly think just talking would accomplish now. After careful consideration, I typed a response. "There's nothing to discuss that can't be handled through proper channels. Please direct all communication to Olivia Martinez going forward." His reply came almost instantly. "Please, one conversation. I'm outside the hospital." A chill ran through me. Dan was here? I quickly texted Marcus. "Dan is apparently outside the hospital. Can you confirm?" While waiting for Marcus's response, I debated whether to alert hospital security. It seemed unlikely that Dan would attempt anything inappropriate in a public setting, but his increasing desperation made him unpredictable. Marcus responded within minutes. "Security confirms. He's in the parking lot, has been there for 30 minutes. Want me to send someone?" I considered the situation carefully. Part of me wanted to ignore Dan completely, to deny him even the satisfaction of a response. But another part, the businesswoman accustomed to confronting problems directly, recognized that a controlled encounter might be useful. "No," I texted back. "Have security escort him up. I'll see him briefly." If Dan wanted a conversation, he could have one, but on my terms, in my territory, with me fully in control of the narrative. I adjusted my position, ensuring I appeared composed and dignified despite the hospital setting. This would not be a reconciliation or negotiation, but it might provide insight into his current state of mind and future intentions. A soft knock at the door announced his arrival. When it opened, I was struck by Dan's appearance, his usually immaculate presentation replaced by rumpled clothes and tired eyes. The security guard who escorted him looked to me for confirmation. "It's fine," I assured him, "but please remain outside the door." Dan stood awkwardly just inside the room, as if uncertain how to proceed now that he'd gained the audience he sought. "You wanted to talk?" I prompted, my voice steady. "So talk." He took a tentative step forward, then seemed to think better of it and remained standing at a distance. "Elena, I don't even know where to start. Perhaps with an explanation of why you thought serving divorce papers while I was in emergency surgery was appropriate." He winced. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. The lawyer was supposed to wait until you were recovered. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated flatly. Like the apartment you've been furnishing with money stolen from our clients? Or the partnership with Victor that violated every clause of your employment agreement? Which mistake are we discussing exactly? Dan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I know how it looks. But Victor, he convinced me there were problems with the company structure. He said your father was holding me back, that the business could be so much more if I had full control. I raised an eyebrow. And you believed that, despite all evidence of the company's success? He had projections, plans. It all seemed so possible. Dan's voice trailed off as he realized how weak his justification sounded. So you decided to steal from clients, file for divorce while I was unconscious, and attempt to seize a company you never owned in the first place. He moved closer, his expression earnest. Elena, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but we built that business together. Whatever the paperwork says, you know how much work I put into it. The business was established and successful before you ever set foot in Portland, I corrected calmly. My family allowed you to manage a small branch operation. You performed adequately for a time, at least until your ambition outgrew your ethics. Dan's face flushed. That's not fair. I brought in new clients, expanded the product line. With designs from the Gallagher portfolio and using connections facilitated by my family, I interrupted. The master craftsmen who actually produced the furniture were Gallagher employees. Long before you arrived, the business systems, the supply chains, the quality standards, all existed before you. So what was I? He demanded, anger finally breaking through his facade of contrition. Just a puppet? A joke you all laughed? About behind my back? The question hung in the air between us. I studied the man I had once loved, trying to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the one standing before me now. You were my husband, I said finally, my voice softer but no less firm. I believed in you. I wanted you to grow into a true partner, in life and in business. I gave you opportunities that few others would have received, and you betrayed that trust in the most painful way possible. For a moment, Dan seemed genuinely affected by my words. Then his expression hardened again. Your family never intended to give me real control. I was always going to be an outsider. That's not true, I countered. My father offered you increasing responsibility every year. You were invited to board meetings, included in strategic planning. But you never showed interest in the larger operation. You were content to be the king of your small domain, rather than a contributing member of a successful family enterprise. Dan paced the small area at the foot of my bed. What happens now? Your father said the divorce will proceed, but what about my future? My career? You've taken everything. You took it from yourself, I corrected. But your future is your own. To determine. The divorce will proceed with accurate financial information. As for your career? I paused, considering. You have skills, Dan. Your ability to connect with clients, to present ideas persuasively, those are real talents. They simply don't entitle you to steal what belongs to others. He stopped pacing, a calculating look replacing his earlier desperation. And if I fight this publicly, tell my side of the story? With what evidence? I asked calmly. We have documented proof of financial misconduct, client overcharging, and attempted intellectual property theft. What do you have beyond your own sense of entitlement? Dan's shoulders slumped slightly as the reality of his situation seemed to finally sink in. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said quietly. It all spiraled so quickly. That's the problem with deception, I replied. Once you start, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. We regarded each other in silence for a long moment, two people who had shared a life, now irrevocably separated by broken trust. I felt a curious absence of emotion. Neither hatred nor love, but a clear-eyed assessment of a relationship that had been built on false premises from the beginning. "I should go?" Dan finally said. "Yes," I agreed. "You should. And Dan? Don't contact me directly again. Everything from now on goes through the lawyers." He nodded, a final acknowledgement of the new reality between us. At the door, he paused, without turning around. "For what it's worth, I did love you. In my way." I watched him leave, the door closing quietly behind him. His parting words echoed in my mind. In my way. Perhaps that had always been our fundamental problem. Dan's way of loving had always been conditional, contingent on how I served his needs and ambitions. And my way of loving him had been compromised by the secrets I kept, even if those secrets had ultimately protected my family's legacy. As the night settled around me, I turned my attention back to the future of the business that would now fully emerge from the shadow of Dan's management. Tomorrow would bring the interview with Melissa Rivera, the beginning of our public narrative, reclamation. The day after, if Dr. Williams approved, I would leave the hospital and visit the workshop for the first time as its acknowledged leader. The path ahead was clear now, free from the constraints of pretense and compromise. Whatever challenges came next, I would face them as Elena Gallagher, no longer hiding my capabilities or conditioning my decisions on someone else's ego. In the quiet hospital room, I began drafting notes for the interview tomorrow, shaping the story not of a marriage's end, but of a business's new beginning. This narrative would be honest, straightforward, and entirely my own. The morning of the interview dawned with unexpected clarity, both in the Portland sky and in my mind. Melissa Rivera would arrive at 2, giving me time to prepare both mentally and physically for what would be my first public statement as the acknowledged head of what was still technically called Mitchell Fine Furniture. Dr. Williams had already completed her morning rounds, pronouncing me fit enough for the conversation, but extracting a promise that I would rest immediately afterward. "Your body is still healing," she reminded me, "even if your mind is running at full capacity." A nurse had helped me shower and change into a simple but elegant blouse my mother had brought from home. Gallagher blue, as my father called it, a deep navy that had appeared in our company's subtle branding for decades. With my hair freshly braided and a touch of color applied to my still pale face, I looked less like a patient and more like the businesswoman I was. Thomas arrived shortly before noon, laptop under his arm and a determined expression on his face. "Victor's made another move," he announced without preamble. "He's filed incorporation papers for Reynolds Artisan Design, used his home address as the business location." I nodded, unsurprised. "And the client contacts?" 3 more yesterday afternoon. All reported it to Marcus immediately. Thomas set up his laptop on my adjustable table. "But that's not the concerning part. Look at this." He turned the screen to show me a sleek website, professionally designed with flowing script announcing Reynolds Artisan Design, continuing a tradition of excellence. The gallery showcased furniture pieces identical to those produced by our workshop, with only the smallest modifications to designs. "He's using our portfolio," I observed, zooming in on a particularly distinctive dining table. "These are clearly derivative of Gallagher designs." It gets worse. Thomas clicked to another tab showing an industry forum. He's posting as an insider about the family dispute threatening Mitchell Fine Furniture, suggesting to potential customers that they should seek alternatives for their high-end furniture needs. I studied the carefully worded post, noting how Victor had managed to imply instability without making specific defamatory claims. "Has Dan made any public statements?" Thomas shook his head. "Nothing since he left the hospital last night. Security reports he returned to the hotel and hasn't emerged today." I considered this information thoughtfully. "He's regrouping, probably consulting with his lawyer about options." I gestured to the website. "Did Olivia see this yet?" "First thing this morning. She's already preparing cease and desist notices." for the design infringements. But she says it's a gray area. Victor was exposed to these designs as a partner in the business, and he's made just enough modifications to claim they're distinct. I frowned, studying the furniture pieces more carefully. To an untrained eye, Victor's versions might indeed seem like original designs, but anyone familiar with Gallagher craftsmanship would recognize the proportions, the distinctive joinery, techniques, the characteristic balance between form and function that had defined our family's work for generations. Forward everything to Marcus and ask him to prepare a comprehensive comparison between these pieces and our catalog designs, I instructed. Focus on the technical elements, the joinery methods, the specific proportions, the wood selection processes. Those are the aspects he couldn't have altered without compromising the integrity of the pieces. Thomas nodded, already typing notes. What about the forum posts? Dad thinks we should respond directly. I shook my head. Not yet. The Rivera interview will establish our narrative. Engaging in forum debates would only lend credibility to Victor's claims of a dispute. We spent the next hour reviewing talking points for the interview, focusing on the company's history, the Gallagher family's long tradition of craftsmanship, and the recent management transition, a delicate euphemism for Dan's removal that Olivia had suggested. At 1:30, my mother arrived with a light lunch and a portfolio containing documentation of the client refunds that had already been processed. Tangible evidence of our commitment to ethical business practices that I could reference during the interview. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying my face with the perceptive gaze that had missed nothing throughout my childhood. "Ready," I replied simply. "This is long overdue." She smiled, adjusting the collar of my blouse with a mother's automatic gesture. "You've always been ready, Elena. The question was whether the world was ready for you." Marcus called as I was finishing lunch, his voice tense with fresh information. Dan's lawyer filed an emergency motion this morning claiming that company assets are being improperly transferred without his client's authorization. I exchanged glances with Thomas and my mother. What assets? Specifically, the client refunds. Phillips is arguing that as the public face and operational manager of Mitchell Fine Furniture, Dan should have been consulted before any financial remediation was implemented. I couldn't help but laugh, though it sent a twinge through my healing incision. He's objecting to us returning money that was improperly taken from clients? That's his legal strategy? Apparently so. Olivia says it's a desperate move, but wanted you to know before the interview in case Rivera has heard about the filing. Thank you, Marcus. This actually works in our favor. It positions Dan as opposing the ethical correction of financial improprieties. I considered for a moment. Has Judge Winters responded to the motion? Not yet, but Olivia doesn't expect a ruling until tomorrow at the earliest. After the call ended, the three of us reviewed this new development in the I-she context of the upcoming interview. It was a clumsy move on Dan's part. Attempting to block customer refunds only reinforced the narrative of his questionable business ethics. At precisely 2:00, Melissa Rivera was escorted into my hospital room. The business journalist was exactly as I remembered from her industry features, sharp-eyed, professionally attired, with the focused demeanor of someone who prioritized accuracy over sensationalism. "Ms. Gallagher," she greeted me, using my family name without prompting. "Thank you for making time during your recovery. How are you feeling?" "Improving daily," I replied with a genuine smile. "Please call me Elena." She set up her recording equipment efficiently while explaining her process. "I'll be publishing this as both a written feature and a podcast segment. Given the circumstances, would you prefer we mention your medical situation?" I have no objection to acknowledging that I'm recovering from emergency surgery, I answered. It's relevant context to recent events. Thomas and my mother positioned themselves discreetly in the corner of the room, present, but not intrusive. Rivera nodded to them politely before turning her full attention to me. "Let's begin with some background. she suggested. Mitchell Fine Furniture has developed a reputation for exceptional craftsmanship over the past 8 years. What most people don't know is its connection to Gallagher Enterprises, which has been in the furniture business for much longer. This perfect opening allowed me to begin exactly where I'd planned, with the Gallagher legacy rather than the Mitchell facade. Gallagher Enterprises was founded by my grandfather in 1953, I explained. What began as a small workshop in Southeast Portland has grown into a diversified furniture design and manufacturing operation with specialized divisions serving different market segments. Mitchell Fine Furniture was established in 2016 as a wholly owned subsidiary focused on bespoke residential and boutique commercial pieces. Rivera nodded, making brief notes. And Daniel Mitchell's role? Dan joined the Gallagher family through marriage and expressed interest in furniture design and sales. Given his background in business consulting and client relations, we offered him the opportunity to manage the Mitchell division, which was named to establish a distinct market identity while remaining part of the larger Gallagher structure. So Mitchell Fine Furniture was never an independent company, Rivera clarified. Never, I confirmed. All legal documentation, from incorporation to property deeds to equipment purchases, clearly establishes it as a Gallagher Enterprises subsidiary. Dan served as the operational manager and public representative, but ownership and ultimate authority always remained with the Gallagher family. Rivera's questions continued methodically through the company's development, allowing me to emphasize the role of master craftsmen who had been with our family for decades and the design heritage that informed the Mitchell collection. Without directly criticizing Dan, I was able to establish that the success of the business stemmed from Gallagher resources, expertise, and connections. Then came the questions I had prepared for most carefully. There are rumors of financial irregularities discovered recently at Mitchell Fine Furniture. Can you address those? I maintained steady eye contact. During a routine review of operations, our financial team identified inconsistencies in client billing practices implemented within the past several months. Upon closer examination, we discovered that certain clients had been overcharged. We've taken immediate steps to rectify this situation, including processing full refunds with appropriate apologies. And these billing practices were implemented by Daniel Mitchell? The changes were made under the current management, yes. I'm not at liberty to discuss specific personnel actions, but we take financial ethics extremely seriously at all Gallagher operations. Rivera nodded, clearly noting my careful phrasing. I understand there's also been a recent partnership dispute between Daniel Mitchell and Victor Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds was briefly involved with Mitchell Fine Furniture through an agreement with Dan that was not properly authorized under company governance procedures. That arrangement has been dissolved. Mr. Reynolds is no longer affiliated with any Gallagher enterprise. And there are now legal proceedings between you and Daniel Mitchell? I took a measured breath. There are ongoing legal matters that I won't comment on specifically. What I can say is that Mitchell Fine Furniture continues to operate under proper Gallagher family oversight. All client commitments are being honored, and our master craftsmen continue their exceptional work without interruption. Rivera studied me thoughtfully before asking her next question. Some might view this situation as a family using its power to push out an in-law during a personal dispute. How would you respond to that characterization? This was the question I had anticipated, the one that struck at the heart of Dan's potential narrative. My mother leaned forward slightly in her chair, while Thomas remained perfectly still, both aware of how crucial my response would be. I would say that characterization fundamentally misunderstands both our family values and our business ethics, I replied calmly. Gallagher Enterprises has thrived for 3 generations by maintaining the highest standards of craftsmanship and integrity. When those standards are compromised, whether by family or non-family management, we have a responsibility to our clients, our employees, and our legacy to take appropriate action. I paused briefly before continuing. This isn't about Personal relationships. It's about business ethics, proper governance, and the protection of a company that supports dozens of skilled artisans and their families. The fact that these issues coincide with personal matters is unfortunate, but doesn't change our obligation to address them. Rivera nodded, seeming satisfied with the response. What changes can clients and industry partners expect at Mitchell? Fine furniture going forward? This transition to future plans allowed me to shift the conversation toward positive developments rather than dwelling on Dan's misconduct. We'll be announcing a rebranding initiative in the coming weeks that better reflects the operation's connection to the Gallagher tradition. Our master craftsmen will have expanded roles in design development, and we're increasing investment in our custom design services, which have always been the heart of our offering. Most importantly, we're reinforcing our commitment to transparency and ethical business practices at every level. The remainder of the interview focused on the technical aspects of furniture design and craftsmanship that had always been my personal passion. Rivera seemed genuinely interested in the distinctive joinery techniques developed by my grandfather and the sustainable wood sourcing partnerships maintained by my father. By the time we concluded, the conversation had evolved from crisis management to an insightful discussion of artisan furniture in the modern market. "Thank you, Elena," Rivera said as she gathered her equipment. "This provides valuable context to what's been circulating in industry circles. I appreciate your candor, especially during your recovery." After she left, accompanied by Thomas, who would show her additional design portfolios in the waiting area, my mother moved to sit beside my bed. "You were magnificent," she said quietly. "Clear, professional, and not a single word that could be construed as vengeful or petty." I smiled wearily, the fatigue I'd been holding at bay finally catching up with me. "I learned from the best. Remember when that supplier tried to claim Dad had approved substandard materials? You dismantled his story so thoroughly in that industry panel that he actually apologized by the end." She laughed softly. "Different circumstances, same principle. The truth, calmly presented, is the most powerful tool in business and in life." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Judge denied Dan's emergency motion. Called the attempt to block client refunds, contrary to basic business ethics. Olivia says it significantly damages his credibility for future filings. I showed the message to my mother, who nodded in satisfaction. "One battle at a time, just as your father always says." By the time Thomas returned, I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The combination of surgical recovery and emotional exertion finally overwhelming my determination to remain alert. "The interview will run tomorrow," Thomas reported. Rivera was impressed with the design archives I showed. Her said they clearly establish our family's long-standing aesthetic that predates Dan's involvement. "Good," I murmured, struggling against encroaching sleep. "We need to visit the workshop tomorrow if Dr. Williams approves my discharge." "One thing at a time," my mother admonished gently. "Rest now. We'll handle everything else." As I drifted toward sleep, I heard Thomas updating our mother on Victor's latest movements, their voices a comforting reminder that I wasn't facing this challenge alone. The Gallagher family had weathered business crises before, long before Dan Mitchell entered our lives, and would continue long after his departure became a distant memory. I awoke to the gentle morning light and the sound of Dr. Williams conversing with a nurse at the foot of my bed. "The incision is healing nicely," she was saying. "Inflammation markers are consistently down. I think we can proceed with discharge this afternoon if the final tests come back as expected." I shifted slightly, alerting them to my consciousness. Dr. Williams turned with a professional smile. "Good morning. How are you feeling today?" "Ready to leave," I replied honestly, though grateful for the excellent care. She approached to examine my surgical site, her movements efficient but gentle. "Any pain overnight? Difficulty breathing? Unusual symptoms?" "Just normal soreness. Nothing unexpected." She nodded, making notes in my chart. Your recovery has been remarkably smooth considering the severity of your condition when you arrived. The nurse will review discharge instructions later today, but I want to be clear about activity restrictions. No lifting anything heavier than 5 pounds, no extended periods of standing or walking, and absolutely no returning to a full work schedule for at least another week. I nodded dutifully, though we both knew I would be working regardless of my location. Some concessions to recovery would be necessary, but complete disengagement from the business during this crucial transition period was simply not an option. After Dr. Williams left, I checked my phone to find multiple messages waiting. The first was from Olivia, confirming Judge Winter's formal denial of Dan's motion to halt the client refunds, with a copy of the strongly worded opinion that questioned both the legal and ethical basis of the request. The second was from Marcus, reporting that all client refunds had been successfully processed, with personal calls from my mother to each affected customer. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with several clients specifically mentioning their appreciation for the Gallagher family's direct involvement. The third was from Thomas, with a link to an industry forum where Victor's insider posts about company instability were being challenged by other users, including several who identified themselves as longtime clients of both Mitchell Fine Furniture and the broader Gallagher enterprises. The natural correction of misinformation was happening without our direct intervention. The final message was from my father, brief but significant. Dale and the team are ready for your visit. Workshop has never looked better. I smiled at the subtle message beneath his words. The master craftsmen, freed from Dan's restrictive management style, were already reclaiming their workspace and preparing to showcase their true capabilities. For many of them, this transition represented not just a change in leadership, but a return to the Gallagher traditions of craftsmanship they had joined the company to pursue. My mother arrived mid-morning with clothes suitable for leaving the hospital and visiting the workshop, comfortable but professional attire that acknowledged both my recent surgery and my leadership position. The Rivera article is out, she announced, handing me her tablet. It's comprehensive. I scanned the piece quickly, impressed by Rivera's thoroughness and balance. The headline was factual rather than sensational. Gallagher family resumes direct management of Mitchell. Fine furniture amid governance changes. The article traced the company's history accurately, establishing the Gallagher legacy that predated Dan's involvement by decades. My quotes appeared in proper context, neither softened nor sharpened in their implications. Most importantly, Rivera had included documentation of the company's ownership structure that clearly refuted any claim Dan might make about being pushed out of his business. A sidebar feature highlighted the master craftsman who had been with Gallagher Enterprises for 20-plus years, emphasizing the continuity of expertise that transcended management changes. This is excellent, I said, handing the tablet back to my mother. Did Dad see it? He's reading it now. Thomas is monitoring industry reactions, but initial responses are positive. The focus on craftsmanship and heritage resonates with our client base. She settled into the chair beside my bed, her expression shifting to something more personal. Elena, there's something we haven't discussed yet, with everything happening so quickly. I looked up, curious about her suddenly serious tone. What is it? Your marriage, she said gently. Beyond the business implications, beyond Dan's betrayal of the company, you're going through a divorce after 12 years. Your father and I have been so focused on protecting the business that we haven't properly acknowledged what this means for you personally. The unexpected shift to my emotional well-being caught me off guard. I had been so immersed in the strategic aspects of the situation that I had compartmentalized the personal loss almost completely. I'm fine, I said automatically, then paused, recognizing the inadequacy of the response. Or rather, I will be fine. The marriage has been changing for years. This just accelerated an ending that was probably inevitable. My mother's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. You loved him once, enough to share our family business with him, to envision a future together. I considered her words carefully, knowing she deserved an honest answer. I did love him, but I've been grieving the loss of that relationship gradually for a long time, as Dan became increasingly dismissive of my input and fixated on his public image as a successful businessman. I adjusted my position, wincing slightly at the pull on my stitches. What happened this week, the divorce papers while I was in surgery, the attempted theft of company assets, that wasn't about our marriage ending, it was about character. And in some ways, seeing his true character so clearly makes the personal aspect easier to process. She nodded slowly. I understand that perspective. Still, when the immediate crisis passes and things settle into a new normal, the emotional aftermath might hit differently. Your father and I just want you to know that we're here for Elena the daughter, not just Elena the business leader. Her words touched me deeply. Throughout my life, my parents had balanced their roles as business mentors and family with remarkable grace, never allowing company matters to overshadow personal relationships. It was one of many lessons I had hoped Dan would absorb from them, one he clearly never had. Thank you, I said simply, reaching for her hand. I promise I won't neglect that side of the equation. But right now, securing the business and protecting our people needs to be the priority. Before she could respond, my phone rang. Thomas. You need to see this, he said without preamble. Dan just gave an interview to Portland Business. Weekly, it's not what we expected. Put it on speaker, I instructed, gesturing for my mother to come closer. I'm sending the link now, but the gist is that he's taking responsibility for misunderstanding his role in the company and acknowledging that the Gallagher family has been the driving force behind the operation's success. He's positioning it as a mutual decision to part ways rather than a forced removal. My mother and I exchanged surprised glances as I opened the link Thomas had sent. The article was brief but striking. Dan was quoted directly. After careful reflection, I recognized that my contributions to Mitchell Fine Furniture, while significant in client relationships and market positioning, were always built upon the foundation of Gallagher Enterprises' extraordinary craftsmanship tradition. I regret any misunderstandings about company ownership and management authority that have occurred during this transition. The Gallagher family has been incredibly supportive throughout my career, and I wish them continued success as they resume direct management of this operation. The statement was crafted with a precision that suggested heavy involvement from his lawyer, but the core message was unexpected, a near complete surrender of his previous position. This doesn't make sense, I said slowly. Just yesterday, he was filing motions to block client refunds and threatening to go public with accusations against our family. Now he's practically endorsing our takeover? That's not all, Thomas continued. He's withdrawn all claims to the business assets in the divorce proceedings. Olivia just called to confirm. He's only asking for personal property and a modest settlement. My mother frowned. Something's happened. This isn't the Dan we've been dealing with all week. Agreed, I said, my mind racing through possible explanations. Thomas, has there been any unusual activity with Victor? Any communication between them since yesterday? Not that we've detected, but I'll have security check phone records. Victor's still actively pursuing client contacts and developing his competing business. A theory was forming in my mind, one that explained Dan's abrupt change in strategy. Check if there's been any communication between Dan and the clients he and Victor overcharged, especially the larger commercial accounts. I'll get Marcus on it immediately, Thomas promised before ending the call. My mother studied my face curiously. You have a theory? I think Dan just realized he's been set up, I explained. Victor convinced him to overcharge clients and divert funds, probably presenting it as a creative financing strategy for their new venture. But Victor was likely keeping separate records. ensuring that if things went south, Dan would appear solely responsible. Understanding dawned in my mother's eyes, and when our refund process exposed the overcharging, Dan realized the evidence trail would lead directly to him rather than being equally distributed. Exactly. His lawyer probably reviewed the documentation and realized his position was untenable. Not just in the divorce, but potentially in criminal charges if any clients decided to pursue them. So this sudden contrition is self-preservation, not genuine remorse, my mother concluded. Almost certainly, but it works in our favor regardless of his motivation. His public acknowledgement of Gallagher ownership eliminates any question about our right to manage the company as we see fit. The remainder of the morning passed in a flurry of activity as I prepared for discharge. Dr. Williams returned with final instructions and prescriptions, emphasizing again the importance of limiting physical activity during the initial recovery period. The hospital staff efficiently processed my paperwork, and by early afternoon, I was seated in a wheelchair as required by hospital policy, ready for departure. My father arrived to drive us to the workshop. His usually stoic expression softened by obvious relief at seeing me dressed and preparing to leave the hospital. "You look more like yourself," he observed, bending to kiss my forehead, a gesture he had maintained since my childhood, despite my having long since grown to adult. I feel more like myself," I replied truthfully, "especially now that I can stop pretending to be less than I am." He nodded in understanding. For years, he had watched me downplay my business acumen and industry knowledge to accommodate Dan's ego, never criticizing my choice but clearly concerned by the pattern. Now, as we prepared to visit the workshop with my full authority acknowledged, I could see his quiet satisfaction in the straightening of his shoulders and the clarity of his gaze. As we drove through Portland toward the Southeast Industrial District where our workshop was located, my father updated me on the team's reaction to the news of my impending visit. "Dale has been reorganizing the design studio all morning," he reported with amusement. "Says it's finally going to be arranged properly again. Werner has pulled out 3 prototype chairs he's been working on secretly, designs Dan had rejected as too experimental for the market." I smiled, imagining the quiet rebellion that had been simmering beneath the surface of Dan's management. "And Joseph?" "Polishing every tool in the place and muttering about proper respect for equipment. You know how he is." The familiar rhythm of the craftsmen's personalities warmed me more than any business success could have. These men had known me since childhood, had taught me to distinguish wood grains by touch, and to understand the mathematics of structural integrity disguised as artistic proportion. While Dan had seen them as skilled laborers executing his vision, I knew them as artists and mentors who had helped shape my understanding of our family's craft. As we approached the building, a renovated warehouse with Mitchell Fine Furniture emblazoned across the brick facade, I felt a curious mixture of homecoming and new beginning. Soon, that sign would change, reflecting the operation's true heritage, but the craftsmanship within would remain constant, as it had through 3 generations of Gallagher leadership. The workshop fell silent as my father helped me through the main entrance. Dozens of eyes turned in our direction, master craftsmen pausing with tools mid-motion, apprentices straightening from their workbenches, office staff emerging from the administrative section at the rear. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the ventilation system and the distant whir of an idle saw. Then Dale stepped forward, his weathered hands wiping clean on his apron, his face breaking into a broad smile that transformed his usually serious demeanor. "Ms. Gallagher," he said formally, though his eyes sparkled with the familiarity of someone who had taught me to sand with the grain when I was barely tall enough to reach the workbench. "Welcome home." Those 2 words, "welcome home," broke the respectful silence. Suddenly, I was surrounded by the men and women who formed the heart of what had been masquerading as Mitchell Fine Furniture, their genuine pleasure at my arrival evident in every face. Werner, tall and precise as always, gestured toward a chair positioned nearby. Not the utilitarian office furniture from the administrative area, but a beautifully crafted piece from his experimental collection, its ergonomic curves specifically, designed to provide support while maintaining an upright posture. "For you," he said simply. "Doctor's orders, no standing for too long." I accepted the thoughtful accommodation, settling carefully into the chair as my father stood supportively at my shoulder. The gathered team formed a semicircle around us, their postures relaxed but attentive. "Thank you all for this welcome," I began, my voice stronger than I had anticipated. "Some of you have known me since I was learning the difference between oak and maple. Others have joined more recently, knowing me only as Dan's wife who occasionally visited the workshop." I paused, making eye contact with several of the newer employees. Today marks a return to transparency about who we are as a company. Mitchell Fine Furniture has always been part of Gallagher Enterprises, guided by our family's commitment to craftsmanship and integrity. That connection will now be acknowledged openly as we move forward together. Joseph, the senior finishing specialist whose attention to detail was legendary throughout the industry, stepped slightly forward. "Does this mean we can stop using the cheaper finishes Mr. Mitchell switched to last year?" A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the group. Joseph had been vocally opposed to Dan's cost-cutting measure, correctly predicting that the less expensive products would not age with the same richness as our traditional materials. "Effective immediately," I confirmed with a smile. "Quality will never be compromised for margins again. Gallagher Furniture is built to last generations, and every element should reflect that standard." For the next hour, seated in Werner's perfectly balanced chair, I outlined the transition plan for the workshop. The Mitchell name would be phased out over 3 months, replaced by Legacy Artisan Furniture, a name that honored our heritage while establishing a distinct identity. Within the Gallagher family of businesses, the custom design division would be expanded, with Dale taking the lead role that his expertise had long warranted. Production schedules would be adjusted to allow proper curing and finishing time, reversing Dan's emphasis on rapid turnaround at the expense of craftsmanship. Most importantly, I explained, each master craftsman would now have direct input into business operations through a newly formed workshop council that would meet weekly with management. Their expertise would guide decisions about materials, techniques, and design evolution, recognizing that the people who physically created our furniture understood its essence best. As the formal meeting concluded and the team returned to their work with noticeably lighter spirits, Dale, Werner, and Joseph remained behind, clearly waiting for a more private conversation. My father excused himself to take a call from Thomas, leaving me with the 3 men who had been with Gallagher Enterprises since before I was born. "There's something you should see," Dale said once we were alone, exchanging significant glances with his colleagues. "In the storage room." Werner helped me stand, and the 3 of them led me toward a door at the back of the workshop that I knew connected to our climate-controlled storage area for specialty woods and works in progress. Joseph unlocked it with a key from his personal ring rather than the workshop master key, an unusual precaution that piqued my curiosity. Inside, beneath carefully draped cloths, stood what appeared to be several furniture pieces. With ceremonial solemnity, Dale removed the first cover to reveal a writing desk of extraordinary beauty, its lines clean and modern while incorporating subtle details that echoed designs from my grandfather's earliest work. The wood was richly figured cherry, finished to a depth that seemed to invite touch. "We've been working on these after hours," Werner explained, as Joseph unveiled a matching chair, its proportions perfectly complementing the desk. "Based on your sketches from 3 years ago." I looked at them in astonishment. My sketches? But those were just rough ideas I was playing with during that Christmas visit. Dale smiled. "They were more than rough ideas, Ms. Gallagher. They showed a true understanding of balance between form and function, something your grandfather always emphasized." Joseph removed the covering from a small side table, completing the collection. Mr. Mitchell found the sketches in your office. At home, brought them in, laughing about your cute hobby. Said we should humor you by pretending they had potential. I ran my hand along the desk's surface, feeling the perfect smoothness achieved only through meticulous preparation and finishing. So you built them in secret? Werner nodded. We saw what you apparently couldn't show openly. Genuine design, talent. These pieces incorporate Gallagher traditions while introducing contemporary elements that expand our aesthetic. They're exactly the direction we should be exploring. The revelation left me momentarily speechless. While Dan had dismissed my design interests as an amusing diversion, these master craftsmen, whose opinions I valued above all others in the field, had recognized something worth pursuing. They had invested countless hours of their personal time to bring my rough concepts to life, believing in my vision when I had been discouraged from expressing it openly. We'd like these to be the first pieces released under the new company name, Dale said. The Elena collection, with your permission, of course. Emotion tightened my throat, making speech momentarily impossible. I nodded instead, touching each piece with the reverence they deserved, not for my initial designs, but for the extraordinary skill that had transformed them into functional art. I don't know what to say, I finally managed, except thank you for seeing possibility where others saw only a hobby. Your grandfather would have recognized it instantly, Joseph said quietly. He always said true design comes from understanding both the materials and the human need. You understand both. As we returned to the main workshop floor, I carried with me not just the knowledge of their secret project, but a renewed certainty about the path forward. The craftsman's validation of my design sensibility confirmed what I had suppressed during my marriage. My connection to the family business went far beyond administrative management or family obligation. I had inherited the creative vision that had defined Gallagher furniture for generations. My father was waiting near the front entrance. His conversation with Thomas apparently concluded. Everything all right? He asked, noting my thoughtful expression. Better than all right, I replied. I'll explain on the way home. As we prepared to leave, Marcus arrived, tablet in hand and an urgent expression on his face. Sorry to interrupt your first day out, but there's a situation developing with Victor Reynolds that needs immediate attention. What's happened? I asked, gesturing for him to walk with us to the car. He's contacted 3 of our largest commercial clients claiming to have exclusive rights to certain designs, specifically the Westbrook collection that was commissioned for hotel installations last year. He's showing them documentation that appears to give him ownership of those designs through his partnership agreement with Dan. My father frowned. That's impossible. Those designs are adaptations of classic Gallagher patterns from the 1970s, updated for commercial application. Exactly, Marcus agreed. But the clients don't know that history. All they see is paperwork with signatures that seem legitimate. I considered this development as we reached the car. Victor's getting desperate. He knows his new company needs established clients to survive the startup phase, and the commercial contracts are the most lucrative. What's our response? My father asked as he helped me into the passenger seat, mindful of my still healing incision. Archival evidence, I decided. Marcus, have Thomas compile the original design documentation from the family records, the 1970s drawings, the evolution of the pattern through subsequent decades, everything that establishes provenance predating Dan's involvement by 40 years. Marcus nodded, already making notes. And for immediate client reassurance, call an emergency meeting with the Westbrook design team at the main Gallagher office tomorrow morning. Invite representatives from all 3 commercial clients to attend in person or virtually. We'll walk them through the design history with the original team members who adapted the patterns for commercial use. Will you be there? Marcus asked, his concern for my health evident. Absolutely. This is too important for second-hand representation. I turned to my father. Can you have the complete design archives brought to the house tonight? I want to review everything before tomorrow's presentation." He nodded, though his expression suggested he would be monitoring my energy levels carefully. "I'll have Thomas bring them over after dinner." As we drove away from the workshop, I watched the building recede in the side mirror. The Mitchell name still prominently displayed, but now understood by everyone inside as a temporary label soon to be replaced. The transition had begun, not just in management structure or market positioning, but in the fundamental honesty with which we presented ourselves to the world. At home, my mother had prepared the study as a temporary command center, with a comfortable recliner positioned to accommodate my recovery needs, while allowing full access to communication technology and work surfaces. She greeted us with concern, etched in her features. "You're pale," she observed, helping me settle into the recliner. "Was it too much too soon?" "Necessary timing," I replied, accepting the glass of water she offered, "and worth any temporary discomfort." The team needed to see me there, to understand that this transition has direction and purpose. She adjusted a pillow behind my back with practiced efficiency. "Marcus called about the Westbrook situation. I've already pulled the original concept. Boards from storage. They were in your grandfather's archival collection." The mention of my grandfather's archives reminded me of the secret project the craftsman had revealed. As my father brought my laptop and tablet to the side table, I described the Elena collection they had created from my forgotten sketches. My mother's eyes brightened. "I always told you those drawings had real potential. Even as a teenager, you had an intuitive understanding of proportion that can't be taught." "Dale wants to launch it as the first official release under the new company name," I explained. "I'm still processing the fact that they built these pieces on their own time, without official authorization or budget." My father smiled. "That's loyalty beyond employment. It's faith in the family vision. Your grandfather inspired that kind of dedication, and it appears you do too." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Olivia, her third of the day according to the missed call log on my phone. I put her on speaker as my parents gathered close to listen. "Elena, I've just received a rather unexpected communication from Dan's lawyer," she began without preamble. "They're proposing a complete settlement of all outstanding issues, contingent on a single condition." "What condition?" I asked, exchanging wary glances with my parents. "Dan wants a statement from Gallagher Enterprises confirming that he acted within his understood authority during his management tenure, and that any financial irregularities discovered were the result of poor advisory services from Victor Reynolds, rather than intentional misconduct on Dan's part." My father's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while my mother's expression turned contemplative. The request was unexpected. Not money, not company assets, but essentially reputation management. "What's your assessment?" I asked Olivia, knowing our lawyer would have already analyzed the implications from multiple angles. "Legally, it's advantageous for us," she replied thoughtfully. "The proposed settlement relinquishes all claims to company assets, accepts a minimal financial package that's well below what he might have received in a contested divorce, and releases the company from any future claims related to his employment or contributions." "And the downside?" my father prompted. "It's primarily reputational. The statement he's requesting, while carefully worded to avoid any actual falsehood, creates a narrative that minimizes his responsibility for actions we know were deliberate. It shifts primary blame to Victor while presenting Dan as misled rather than complicit." I leaned back in the recliner, considering the proposal carefully. Dan was essentially asking us to help him save face, to give him a story he could tell in business circles that wouldn't permanently damage his future prospects. In exchange, he would walk away without further attempts to claim company assets or extract a significant financial settlement. "What about the client overcharges?" I asked. "Does the proposal address restitution?" "Actually, yes," Olivia confirmed. "Dan is offering to personally cover any refunds not attributed directly to Victor's actions, using his settlement funds if necessary. It's a gesture that would resonate with affected clients. My mother touched my hand gently. It's your decision. Elena, you're the one who was betrayed both personally and professionally. I thought about the past 12 years, the gradual erosion of partnership in our marriage, the dismissal of my business insights, the ultimate betrayal of divorce papers delivered during my most vulnerable moment. The anger was still there, a banked fire beneath my calm exterior. Part of me wanted Dan to face the full consequences of his actions, to experience the professional humiliation he had tried to inflict on me. But another part, the business leader rather than the wounded spouse, recognized that prolonged conflict served no strategic purpose. The company was secure. The team was energized about the new direction. The craftsmanship that had defined Gallagher Furniture for generations would continue uncompromised by Dan's misguided priorities. Tell Phillips we'll consider the proposal with one modification, I finally told Olivia. The statement will acknowledge that Dan operated within the structure established when he joined the company, and that Victor Reynolds provided advisement that contributed to recent financial irregularities. But we won't characterize Dan's level of awareness or intent. Those aspects remain unaddressed. That's a reasonable counter, Olivia agreed. It provides the professional cover he's seeking without requiring you to make claims about his state of mind that we know to be false. After ending the call, I sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications of the decision. My father squeezed my shoulder supportively. You're choosing resolution over retribution, he observed. That's leadership thinking. My mother nodded in agreement. The company moves forward without distraction. The truth is known to those who need to know it. The rest is just narrative. Just narrative. The phrase captured perfectly what Dan had always valued most, the story told about him in business circles, the public perception of his success. He was willing to sacrifice financial claims and ownership pretenses to preserve that narrative. In its own way, it was a revealing final chapter to our relationship. Thomas arrived shortly after dinner with the design archives my father had requested. Leather portfolios containing decades of Gallagher Furniture evolution, meticulously documented from initial sketch to final production model. As we spread the materials across the study's large work table, the family legacy was literally at my fingertips. My grandfather's precise draftsmanship, my father's technical innovations, and now, somewhere in this continuum, my own emerging design voice. The Westbrook collection's origins are unmistakable, Thomas commented, placing the original 1970s drawings beside the recent commercial adaptations. No one who sees these side by side could possibly believe Victor's claim to the intellectual property. It's the continuity that matters most, my father added, tracing the evolution of a particular joinery technique through successive decades. Not just isolated designs, but a coherent design language that has developed organically over generations. As we prepared for the next day's presentation to the commercial clients, sorting materials and developing our approach, I felt a profound sense of rightness that transcended the immediate crisis management. This was the work I had been born to, not just protecting a family business from external threats, but actively contributing to its creative and strategic direction. The Mitchell chapter was ending, its false narrative of independent success replaced by the authentic story of Gallagher craftsmanship. The transition would require careful management and clear communication, but the foundation was unshakable. 3 generations of furniture makers committed to excellence, now joined by a 4th ready to honor tradition while embracing innovation. The final confrontation with Victor Reynolds unfolded in the last place I would have expected, the local courthouse cafe, 2 weeks after the successful client presentation. I had just finished meeting with Olivia to sign the finalized divorce papers when I spotted him sitting alone at a corner table, staring into a cooling cup of coffee with an expression of profound defeat. My first instinct was to walk past without acknowledgement, to deny him even the small satisfaction of my attention. But something Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe just the clarity that comes with closure, made me approach his table instead. "Victor," I said simply, neither greeting nor accusation. He looked up, surprise briefly animating his features before settling back into resignation. "Elena, I heard you were making it official today." He gestured vaguely toward the courthouse. "Yes, clean endings make for better beginnings." He nodded, studying me with unexpected candor. "You don't look like someone who just ended a 12-year marriage." "That ended when Dan served papers. While I was in surgery," I corrected. "Today was just paperwork." Victor winced slightly at the reminder, then surprised me by asking, "May I?" with a gesture toward the empty chair across from him. I hesitated before sliding into the seat, curious about what he might say now that his schemes had collapsed so completely. "I underestimated you," he admitted without preamble. "Dan said you were just a supportive wife who occasionally visited the workshop, called you decorative but harmless." The description, so dismissive of everything I was, should have stung. Instead, it only reinforced how little Dan had truly known me despite our years together. "That was convenient for both of you," I observed. "Easier to plot when you think no one's watching." Victor's laugh held no humor. "Much good it did us. Your family dismantled everything in what, 3 days? 4? While you were still in a hospital bed." "The Gallagher approach to business has always been thorough," I replied, allowing myself a small smile. "Something you might have discovered with minimal research before attempting to steal a company that's been operational since 1953. He shook his head, a rueful acknowledgement of his miscalculation. "For what it's worth, Dan didn't know about—" "The client overcharges at first. That was my initiative, creating a fund for our new venture. By the time he figured it out, he was already implicated." I studied him, weighing the likely truth of this statement against what I knew of Dan's character. It was possible Victor had indeed been the architect of the more explicitly fraudulent aspects of their plan, with Dan falling into complicity through weakness rather than initial malice. "Does that matter now?" I asked finally. "Probably not," Victor conceded. "The results are the same either way." We sat in silence for a moment, the strange intimacy of adversaries who no longer have reason to fight. His career in the furniture industry was effectively over. No company would trust him after his attempted appropriation of Gallagher designs had become public knowledge. My own path forward was clearer than it had been in years, unburdened by pretense or compromise. "What will you do now?" I asked, more from courtesy than genuine interest. Victor shrugged. "My cousin has a marketing firm in Chicago. Says he can use someone with my creative approach to business challenges." His attempt at irony fell flat, the words hollow with acknowledged defeat. I nodded and stood, our brief conversation having satisfied whatever impulse had led me to approach him. "Goodbye, Victor." As I turned to leave, he spoke once more. "He did love you, you know, in his way." I paused, remembering Dan's similar parting words in my hospital room. That's the problem, isn't it? His way never included seeing me as I actually am. Without waiting for a response, I walked away, leaving Victor and the last remnants of the Mitchell chapter behind me. Outside the cafe, the spring sunshine illuminated the courthouse steps where my parents waited. My father patient and solid, my mother alert and perceptive, both of them representing the unshakable foundation I had temporarily lost sight of during my marriage. "It's done?" my mother asked as I joined them. "Completely," I confirmed, taking a deep breath of the fresh air that suddenly seemed sweeter, lighter. "Let's go home." Home, not to the house I had shared with Dan, which was already on the market, but to the Gallagher family home where I was staying temporarily while searching for a new place that would be authentically mine. Home to the workshop where the Elena collection was taking shape beneath skilled hands that valued craft over compromise. Home to the legacy I had been born to uphold and now would help to evolve. The workshop called, my father mentioned as we walked toward the car. The first complete bedroom set from your collection is ready for final approval. I smiled, feeling the last weight of the past lifting away. Perfect timing. The most profound wisdom often emerges from our deepest struggles. As I reflect on the journey from betrayal to reclamation, certain truths have crystallized. Insights that might resonate with anyone facing their own moments of unexpected transformation. Sometimes the most painful endings bring the most beautiful beginnings. What feels like devastation in the moment can become the foundation for something truer to who you really are. This became clear to me in those first days after discovering Dan's betrayal. What he intended as my lowest moment, serving divorce papers while I recovered from surgery, instead became the catalyst for reclaiming my authentic self. The very act meant to diminish me ultimately freed me from years of subtle constraint. Your greatest strength may be hidden beneath years of compromise. Rediscovering it isn't about becoming someone new, but remembering who you've always been. For too long, I dimmed my light to make space for Dan's ambition, tucking away my design talents and business acumen behind the role of supportive wife. The journey back to myself wasn't about developing new capabilities, but rather removing the filters I had placed on existing ones, allowing my innate strengths to emerge without apology or modification. The people who truly see you will nurture your potential even when you've forgotten it exists. Dale, Werner, and Joseph, secretly building furniture from my casual sketches, embodied this truth perfectly. While Dan dismissed my design ideas as a cute hobby, these master craftsmen recognized genuine talent worth cultivating. They kept faith with my potential during years when I had nearly surrendered it completely. True power isn't found in controlling others, but in finally refusing to be controlled, whether by expectations, fear, or the comfort of familiar limitations. The most liberating aspect of taking control of the family business wasn't the authority itself, but the permission it gave me to operate without constant self-editing. Each decision made from authentic judgment rather than calculated accommodation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself previously surrendered. Legacy isn't what others build in your name, but what you build with your own hands and heart when you're finally brave enough to create without permission. The Elena collection became more than furniture. It was tangible evidence of my emergence from Dan's shadow. Each piece represented not just aesthetic choices but a declaration of identity, a statement that my vision had value precisely because it was uniquely mine. Sometimes betrayal is the universe's way of removing what no longer serves your highest good, when you cannot bring yourself to let it go. This truth was perhaps the hardest to embrace, yet ultimately the most healing. Despite years of growing inequality in our marriage, I might never have found the courage to end it myself. Dan's betrayal, painful as it was, accomplished what my own conflict avoidance could not, clearing the path for an authentic life I might otherwise never have claimed. Your worth is inherent, not earned through usefulness to others. The moment you stop measuring your value through others' metrics is the moment you begin to truly live. For years, I unconsciously evaluated myself through Dan's responses, his approval, his recognition, his willingness to acknowledge my contributions. Liberation came with the recognition that my value existed completely independent of his perception, neither enhanced by his praise nor diminished by his dismissal. The most powerful revenge isn't destruction but creation, building something so authentic and meaningful that the past becomes merely prologue to your true story. While the initial shock of betrayal triggered understandable anger, the most satisfying response wasn't in dismantling Dan's schemes, but in creating something he could never have imagined. The flourishing workshop, the celebrated design collection, the transparent leadership. These positive creations ultimately overshadowed any satisfaction that might have come from mere retribution. True healing isn't about forgetting the wound, but about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were surrendered during the wounding. The path forward wasn't about pretending the betrayal never happened, but about gathering up the scattered pieces of identity I had set aside during 12 years of marriage. Each reclaimed aspect, designer, leader, strategist, craftsperson, became not just restoration, but evolution, incorporating both hard-earned wisdom and rediscovered joy. Sometimes the most important journey isn't to a new destination, but back to yourself, the self you've always been beneath the compromises and accommodations. This truth resonates most deeply as I settle into leadership of the family business, not as someone transformed by crisis, but as someone restored to authentic alignment. The capabilities were always there, merely waiting for permission to express themselves fully without dilution or apology. As I move forward into this new chapter, these insights serve as both compass and companion, reminding me that even our most painful experiences can yield unexpected wisdom when viewed through the lens of growth rather than grievance. The woman who emerged from that hospital room is both familiar and new, stronger for having been tested, clearer for having seen through illusion, and ultimately more authentically herself than she might ever have become without the clarifying fire of betrayal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.